I inserted myself in the program. But you didn't know because you might have left if you'd seen it. I was worried that perhaps some of you would have to leave early and go to wherever you came from. So I wanted to get this chance to thank you. But I managed to visit with a lot of you before the service started, so that was nice. Some of you are here, as Alana said, because you knew Alec, but perhaps not me, and some of you are here because you know me, and perhaps not Alec. And I guess most of you know most of us. So I just wanted to continue a little bit of what other people said, but concentrate on the two things that impressed me about Alec. And one of them was his love for people, which we've seen that, and his energy and enthusiasm that just couldn't be squelched no matter what you did. Alec was game for anything. I think his secret was, though, that he went to bed about 9:30 at night. Whereas mine's a lot later. And of course, his love of people and friends begins with his children and grandchildren, his family. And in the 50s, men didn't often handle babies, but not Alec. As soon as that first baby came, he claimed it. And in order, he gave them pet names, love names. And if he were to introduce his family today, they'd be Bean, Blullo, Chicky, Chacho, Yakadoo, Muffy, and Dodie. And Darling. And translated, of course, he had one for Rowan, too. Rowan's the wee man. And now, if translated, that would be Sandy, David, Heather, Sheena, Peter, Marla, and Doreen. I'm still Darling. He loved meeting new people, as you've heard, and finding out who they are and remembering them. And he's still, Wendell's still writing to Vera McMahon, because Alec's 4-point charge was where Wendell is from. And she and Alec were still writing to each other. If you were his friend, you were his friend for life. And many, many letters crossed the miles until computers came into our lives. And then he wrote every single week on Friday. He wrote 3 columns or blogs or whatever they're called Blether, Havering, and Clype. Now, Anne Logie will be able to translate those Scottish words into English. But you don't need to tell anyone, though, especially Clype. About 90 people receive these a week. And he remembered names and situations of friends from years back. And this is one of his Bibles. He's had this for years. It's become a family heirloom. Every friend he ever knew, this is it. And the heirloom is claimed by our daughter, Chacho or Sheena. She has asked for this years ago. She's, Dad, I want that. So this is one of his Bibles. All his friends are in here. Now, he liked to meet new people, and I was only listening to Heather talking about how he filled himself for what he lacked when he was a child. Of course, that's why. He likes friends, and they're good friends, and he treasures them. If he couldn't find a familiar face, he'd talk to a stranger. When we'd go in a restaurant for lunch or something, Alec would scan who's it he can talk to and see, and I would go right to an empty booth and sit down. And it wasn't that I wasn't sociable, but, you interrupt people's meals, and it's not that much fun. So one time when we first moved to Moose Jaw, we went into one of those large old banks building, and there's several people waiting in line, and he caught the eye of a woman that maybe to him looked familiar, and he liked to see what the new people are going to be like in this town. So he says, "Hello, how are you?" And then he steps back. "Have you met my wife?" She says, "I haven't met you." But he would do. He would just love that. And I mentioned his energy. He arranged 2 groups of teenagers to go to Expo from Saskatchewan by train to Montreal. He did weekend retreats. He led groups at night. He loved weddings. And one Saturday, and of course his energy, he was over at the church in Moose Jaw playing 4 square. Is that the one with the rope and the ball? And Anyway, with some teenagers in his runners, in his jeans, and the sanctuary and the hall were connected by a glazed hall. And he looked out and he saw some people all dressed up going into the church. And, of course, he had a wedding that he didn't realize that the time had flown by. He didn't have time to come home and change and get into his gown. He had runners and jeans on, so he found an old black, long choir gown. And he had the caretaker wire one of his collars on it. And he went over to perform the service, and he's telling the story like he doesn't know what an embarrassment is. He was telling the story to us, and he said, when I was up in the pulpit, I had to walk like Groucho Marx so that my gown would cover the runners. So, speaking of weddings, one time he came home from performing a wedding, and he said, Joy, that was my 100th wedding. I said, really? I said, which bride was the most memorable? He said, the first one. Oh, I said, the girl in the blue suit that got married at the manse and I picked flowers for her out of the garden? He says, no, and he smiled. My first bride. Oh, you got it. I wasn't sure about that. Anyway, one of the reasons why I inserted myself in here is that it gives me a chance to thank Dorothy, whom Alec, again from his bed, wanted Dorothy, and your wonderful singers. And Kim, thank you for making this the first time you did a public performance. Yeah. And, of course, Alana, who brought this all together. And each of you has your own reason for being here today. And when this is ended, if Alec were here, he would race down the aisle. He was the fastest gal in the West. That's what people would say. To make it to the door so he could shake hands with everybody before they left. So that's what he'd do. He'd put out his hand for your hand. Your hand would, and when your hand went in there, he'd put his other hand over. So actually, he had you trapped. And he wouldn't let go until he knew something more about you or something about you if you were new.